okay, you're writing, and then suddenly, the writing grinds to a halt. Working through writer's block. What do you do? Okay, now, first of all, why do people have blocks? To begin with, why do people have these writing moments of writer's blocks at all? Well, because maybe you fear criticism. You're afraid of being criticized, or being, and you might fear your instructor. What are they going to say when they read this, right? Well, just I don't know. You gotta work through that. You gotta, like I say, imagine yourself in front of an audience. Imagine your sources being there with you, having a dialogue in front of your audience, and for that matter, imagine your instructor being in that audience. Okay, and what can you do to get over criticism, fear of criticism? Well, just keep on having that dialogue. I mean, just try to work through it, right? Maybe you have feelings of failure, that no matter what you write, it's going to be a failure, right? Well, just you got to work through that as well. Now, I will show you, techniques for working through these blocks, but these are reasons why you might have these blocks. You feel like you're unclear in your direction. You don't know where you're going, and as I had mentioned before, maybe you've written a very wonderful, very explicit draft, and you thought you knew exactly where you're going, but then when you started writing, you realized, oh my goodness, writing has this capacity to draw you off in another direction, and now the draft doesn't make sense anymore. Well, in that case, you might have to go back and revise the draft, right? Writing is a process of thinking, so you might think through something which leads you in an opposite direction, not necessarily opposite direction, but in a slightly different direction. In that case, you're going to have to go back and revise your draft. And it is advisable, let me say this again, it is advisable to start early with these things, because of that, because of this this reality that writing will often carry you into a different direction. Writing itself is a process of thinking. So you might have to go back and revise the draft. And there it is, fear of writing as a process, because you've done this before, and you know that writing will bring you off in this other direction. Well, there it is. That's just a fact. Maybe you're bored with your own topic, right? Well, that is that probably, boredom with the topic is probably the greatest thing that has to be overcome. Any of these other things can be worked through, but boredom with the topic is probably one of the hardest things to overcome. All right. Fear of success. Maybe you fear that if you do a great job, more will be expected of you in the future, or even that somehow you'll expose yourself, and then you'll be required, to rise up into greater responsibility or something like that. And that, I mean, it might not be such a huge thing when writing a paper. But think of it in terms of your life direction, right? What if you succeed in something such that it actually gets you noticed, and then you're called to a status of greater responsibility? Sometimes people do fear that, right? So that's just a challenge that you have to step up to. But that fear of success, that I think at Queen's, is part of your spiritual discernment and part of your spiritual journey as well. Okay, boredom with the topic is probably the most difficult thing to overcome in writing a paper or a thesis. Fear of success is more broad ranging. It's not just about your paper writing or thesis writing. I think it's about your whole spiritual direction, right? The other four, I think, can be overcome through working through various exercises. So let's look at the strategies for working through blocks. Just do some, free writing exercises. Don't try to get right into writing your paper. Just do some free writing exercise, just to sort of like, get the lid off the source. Let's say open the spring, get it flowing. Right. Once you get it flowing, then maybe it'll come easier when you're writing the paper as well. Right. So just, you might just sort of sit down and write what you have written so far. Summarize. Don't think of this as part of your thesis or part of your paper. It's a separate thing. It's just an exercise. You can write it in a notebook rather than on your computer if you wish, right? So just summarize what you've written so far, and then that'll get you back into the flow of it, okay? You might write about how you feel about what you have written so far. You might say, I think it's terrible, or I think it's great, or this about it I like, or this about it I don't like, right? But even just the writing itself, and like I said, this could be written in a notebook, right? Don't think of it as part of your paper, but as a separate thing, just to get the flow started. Write about how the original outline has evolved. So maybe your draft has changed in the writing process itself. You know, you've been directed in a new direction, so you had to change your draft just slightly, right? So you could write about that. You could write about whether your author or audience roles have changed. Maybe you started out just saying, well, I've got something new and interesting to show you about X. But then you've decided that no, it's deeper than that. It's more about, you know, understanding something in a new way, or maybe a new practical problem has come to life that you're thinking about, right? So maybe your author and audience roles have changed in the process of writing. And actually that's a very good exercise to do, because if they have changed, it's good to make that very explicit for yourself, right? So that you can sort of reassess what exactly your author role is now. How you feel about writing about others' works. Like sometimes people, and I think this is one of the reasons why people will sometimes plagiarize inadvertently, because they're interested in an idea, but they allow themselves to sort of, you know, go off on the idea, and they start, you know, they're engaging in others' works and their thinking, but not in their writing. So they're thinking along with that author, but they're not referring to that author, right? And but they don't. But if you have to actually force yourself to write, well, so and so says this, they don't really like that. You know, I don't want to write about others' works. I just want to think, right? But you've really so write about that. You know what you feel about writing about others' works. You could write about what you will be writing about in the next section. So just, you know, and maybe when you do that, for example, maybe there's a paragraph or two, or even just a sentence or two that are really good. So you might end up incorporating those sentences or those passages into the actual body of your text itself. Rehearse or orally the point that you want to make, either by yourself or with someone else in your household. The other thing you could do is record yourself and then go back and listen to what you've said. And so rehearsing orally, recording yourself, and then go back and listen to what you've said. And that while you're listening to what you're saying, you can get more ideas, sort of reading between the lines and figure out where to put extra points in. Okay. And then you could also write about what might be giving rise to your problems, or what might be giving rise to your blocks. Maybe write about, you know, well, I'm feeling fear of criticism for this reason, or who is it that you are fearful of? Are you fearful of your instructor's criticism? Are you fearful of your you know, your student peer criticism? I mean, what are you fearful of, right? Or do I fear success, or do I fear failure, or am I bored with my topic? You know, why are you bored with your topic? You know, that kind of thing, right? So write about that. um, Now the other thing, other strategies, so all those little writing exercises. Other strategies that you might use is write with others in a group. Now, this just having the other person there who's also writing will sometimes inspire you, you know, get the flow going. Write incrementally, a little paragraph or a subsection at the time. Like a lot of times people sit down in front of their computer and they say, okay, I've got this paper to write. And they feel overwhelmed with it and they can't even start, right? Well, but if you imagine that you're going to sit down and you're only going to write one paragraph, or you're only going to write one subsection, then that's a lot helpful. It's, you know, like mentally, you feel like you can take on a paragraph maybe much easier than taking on a whole paper, right? So you don't feel the block, then you don't feel the fear. Also, it'll help you if you've got your draft very explicitly broken down into all those little subsections. And you don't necessarily have to write all the subsections in the order that you've got them, right? You can write a later subsection. Maybe you will have to sort of work it out a little bit or wiggle things around a little bit if you go back then and write an earlier section and the writing process itself takes you in a slightly different direction. But another thing is that if you've got the draft and your writing process takes you in an alternate direction, maybe you do want to bring yourself back to the original draft. Maybe you want to say, well, this is a tangent. So try to be discerning as well um, between tangents that the writing process has brought you to versus actual working out of ideas, which makes another direction necessary. So try to be discerning there, right? And sometimes writing later paragraphs first will help you when you're writing the earlier paragraphs because you'll see where you want to go of what in terms of what you've already written in the later paragraphs. Okay, so work on that. And then write for a set period each day. So let's say you set yourself a certain block of time, let's say between 10 and 12 or between 7 and 9 in the evening, whenever you feel most inspired, whenever you feel you can set a block of time for yourself outside of other family responsibilities. Okay. And if you always write during that period each day, it'll set up a kind of habit where it'll become easier and easier for you to write if you always write during the same period, because then it's like just like you always eat kind of at the same time of day, right? The body gets used to these kind of bodies love habits, right? So minds love habits as well. So if you do it always at the same time of day, it'll become easier to get into the space of writing because the mind will say, okay, now, and the body too, right? The body will sit in the chair and the mind will say, okay, now it's time to write, and it'll become easier if it becomes a habit. um, Consciously give yourself credit for how much you have already written. Say to yourself, wow, look, I've already written 3 sections. Doesn't that feel great? And look, those sections are good, right? Give yourself, the pat on the back, because that it makes the heart lighter, you could say. Then you feel, better to write further. And then, really visualize the completed essay, visualize the thesis, the project already finished. There it is. Ooh, look at that. You've written but actually look at all the pages that you've got to go, and imagine it's already finished. Wouldn't that be wonderful, right? That helps. I mean, positive thinking really does help, right? Visualization exercises really do help. Okay, so those are some strategies for working through the blocks.